Okay, so thank you for coming today. I'm aware that everybody's quite busy this week and KubeCon is on in North America. I'm sure people are keen to see some of the presentations in that. Just giving you a little bit of an overview of what we'll be doing today. We will be, we've got a couple of different demos today around infrastructure automation from David, as well as New Relic, who are quite competent Argo users, and they're going to be talking a bit about their different, how they use Argo and so forth. And we'll also be giving a short how-to to edit workflows in VSCode using the plugin. And then finally, we'll close out with some Argo workflows v3 stuff. Okay. Now, if you haven't already added yourself to the document here, please add yourself under the attendees so we know who comes to this. We're kind of particularly interested in what you use Argo workflows and Argo events for, and we like to learn a lot about that. So, this is important to us so we can kind of start to tailor, where we invest our time and energy to make sure we support your different use cases. So it is really useful. In fact, the more detail you can give, the better. For those of you who have not joined before or don't know so much about Argo workflows, Argo CD, Argo rollouts, and Argo workflows and Argo events are all Argo products that help with things such as running workflows, scheduling actions on your cluster, performing GitOps continuous delivery, and rolling out new versions of applications. And we have 2 community meetings a month, one focused on Argo CD and Argo rollouts, which is really focused more on application delivery. And we have an Argo workflows and Argo events community meeting the alternate Wednesday, every third Wednesday of the month. And we talk about things like ML and batch and so forth in this one. We've got a couple of Argo engineers here on the call, as myself on the call. We've also has Bala. I think we also probably have Simon as well, so they can help answer any of your questions. If you do want to ask a question, the best way to do that is just to kind of either ask when it just seems appropriate, and if you think it needs a longer answer, maybe you can hold off to the end. And you can also ask in the chat room, and we'll read out your questions to whoever's presenting at that point. We are recording this, and we put the video up on YouTube later on for people to watch. Okay, any questions? I think we're good, aren't we? Okay, so David, are you ready?
Yes, I have a little bit unstable connection, but I hope it will be okay. I actually got disconnected and reconnected now, so okay. I hope it will be fine throughout the presentation. Okay. So,
do you want to take over the screen share and crack on?
Yep.
Okay.
So, just a second. Can you see my screen? Something on my screen? Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, so I'm going to talk about serverless Argo events and how we used Argo events and Argo workflows in a project it's called 5G Media. It was a European project, now it's completed. So I will give you the motivational use case, but I would like to start from some feature that I want to present. So basically, I would like to start from presenting myself. I'm a researcher at IBM Haifa Research Lab. So I was giving a presentation at KubeCon, and Alex was in the audience, and I'm very grateful that he actually invited me to give this talk, so I really appreciate. I have a web page. You can check it, publications and patents and so on. I'm a senior technical staff member, which means I'm mostly on the architecture side of things, technical leading people, and algorithm research and so on. My background is in distributed computing, networking, mathematical optimization, and my Git profile is really nothing special. So I come here with a lot of humility because you guys are developers and probably will hit me without salt. But I'm working on re-establishing my development, so maybe it's going to change. I'm a very hands-on technical lead. Currently, I focus on serverless technology, and in the past, I contributed to OpenWhisk and applied OpenWhisk and KNative in various contexts, ranging from big data analytics to serverless at the edge, how we use serverless with GPUs, media-intensive applications, so on. And recently, my research agenda revolves around 5G networks, orchestration, and promoting Kubernetes native infrastructure style orchestration in 5G. And specifically, we look at 5G MAC issues, network slices, and stuff like that. Most important, I'm extremely fortunate to work with very, very smart people and talented people. And Pavel and Avi, who are my colleagues who participated and contributed in this work, they are on the call. So I'm almost done with my shameless plugin of our lab. So that's how our lab looks like. Really nice. The talk at KubeCon Europe, using Argo and KNative to orchestrate media-intensive services in 5G Edge. I'm not going to create this talk in this call today, but I will mention the highlights of it. So we have this project that I mentioned. It's called 5G Media, programmable edge-to-cloud virtualization fabric for the national 5G media industry. So these are participants in the consortium. We had very interesting and talented consortium there. And Argo was extremely useful for this project. Basically, I can, because I don't see, I cannot actually ask you, please raise your hand who has experience with telcos and Mano and open source Mano in particular. Probably a few people, or maybe more than a few people here know what I'm talking about. So the telco management and orchestration solutions are really not flexible enough and really not cloud native enough to allow complex execution for cutting edge application that you want to put into the 5G network at the edge of the 5G network. Initially, we kind of stuck without orchestration tool. Yeah, now Zoom tells me that my connection is unstable. Do you still hear me well, or there is a problem here?
You sound absolutely fine.
Oh, okay, good. And Argo really was a real lifesaver for us in the project, and I'll explain why. And we so fall in love with Argo workflows and Argo events, so we started using them in our other projects. All of these projects are research projects, but as you know, Argo, IBM uses Argo in production as well, and we work with people in production. So there is more and more positive attitude towards Argo, and I'm very happy about this, and it's absolutely a great tool. And maybe if we will have other opportunities to discuss also how we use this in other projects, I will talk also about other projects, but not today. So let me talk quickly about, so that was an introduction. Let me talk now about a small feature that we thought about, and we thought it might be useful and interesting to the Argo community. And if not, just throw rotten tomatoes at us and say you don't understand what you're talking about, it's not important, and so on. So we are really not dogmatic about it, which just thought might be nice. It's easy to do, and we did a prototype of that. And you have a GitHub for that. The only thing I have to say, there is a disclaimer here, the implementation uses an old version of Argo, but we can rebase if the community finds it interesting, and we can submit it, of course, through the regular process and so on. So what is it? The gateway and pods, right, that run all the time, regardless of whether there are events to handle or not. What we suggest is to make them KNative services so that they do not consume resources when there are no events to handle. There are pros and cons, of course. Pros, if you really have proliferation of these gateways and sensors, and somehow we managed to build an architecture in 5G media where we had very many of them, you would like to conserve resources in a resource-constrained environment. And if there are many such pods, maybe they do not need to run all the time, so you can do some sort of statistical multiplexing gain, and you will be able to do more work on the same capacity. And basically, the reason that it proliferated with us was that once we understood that the traditional mono solution would not be extremely good for us, we used this itself as an orchestrator, Argo as a workflow during the event manager, and we onboarded network services directly to Kubernetes. And the entry point into the orchestration of these services was a pair of gateway and sensor. So onboarding stage, whoever knows what it means in telco means that nothing should run at this point, to just register your service with the system, and then you instantiate it for the time needed. And then it means that when we did this onboarding, we somehow created this in large amounts, gateways, and we didn't want them all the time, but rather be there, known to Kubernetes, and only be used when we actually need them. Of course, if you make it a KNative service, you have cold start, so probably not good for real time, so it's a trade-off, basically. So I can show you a short demo. Let me see on time, I think I'm pretty much okay. I'll try to speed up a little bit. So let me show you a really, really short demo. Just tell me if you see the fonts all right. So basically, first, let's take a look at what's running here. So nothing is running except controllers, gateway, and sensor. And here, the fonts are not extremely good. Let's take a look at this YAML. I don't know if you can see here in the specification of the gateway, for example, that it says KNative gateway HTTP, KNative. So that's kind of a new type here that we added. So it's not very important what is the implementation inside. It's really not very important right now. In the sensor, you also see that this is a new type of the sensor called KNative sensor. And basically, right now, we just want to pass a message to the gateway, and the sensor will get it from the gateway and say hello with the payload of the message. So we create the gateway and sensor pair. Okay. So they are created, and now we would like to see what happens to them. So they're created, this start running. So I guess you have a pretty good idea what's going to happen next. You see that one of them will start terminating now, right? Because it's already the grace period of KNative, so it's terminating. So these KNative gateway and sensors start terminating, and they are there, but they are not consuming any resources now, so they became serverless. We want to do something with that, so we just do curl into the gateway, and let's see what happens. So we just say hello, right? So there is a message. So it's successful. And so we see hello webhook, right? So it worked. So in spite of the gateway and sensor actually terminating, native, get them back, run for the grace period, no handle, they go down and do not consume resources anymore. Okay, so I guess that was pretty straightforward. So I will just jump directly to the motivational use case and talk a little bit more about this 5G media project and how we used Argo in the broader context. Okay, so give you some interesting stuff. And later, if you want to give some feedback on that or ask questions, we can loop back to the demo and that feature. Okay, so these are people, right? So we have this problem. We have media-intensive services. They need to run at 5G edge. We need to orchestrate them somehow. So why Argo and KNative and how we use them already. So what's the problem again? Okay, so what we want to do is to facilitate in that project is to facilitate deployment of the third-party software at the edge, and want to do it cost efficiently, so it will be instantaneously elastic but easy to scale down and fast time to market. So it's very difficult to do with VMs, and I do not need to spend too much time in this audience trying to convince you. Really, it's not doable with VMs. But what are we after here? We basically these media-intensive applications, most of them are session-based and they're event-driven. They are like teleimmersive gaming, distant learning, holographic teleconferencing, telepresence, mobile journalism. So there is a session, it's driven by event, it happens, then all the infrastructure for this session can be disposed. So basically, we just need a mechanism to do this orchestration on demand for this infrastructure to be propped up where needed, when needed, for the exact duration where it's needed. And these were our use cases. So we had a very interesting use case on teleimmersive gaming, working with specialists in these gaming domains. So basically, it's about democratizing teleimmersive gaming. Nowadays, you only have this type of experience in amusement parks, but in the future, when 5G is around, games like this can be commonplace and mainstream. So basically what happened here, we had 4 Kinect sensors that captured the person. It was actually person, not the avatar of the person. 3D geometry was created, time variable. It's a lot of traffic, and it's a very, very latency sensitive. So it's really, really 5G application. You need to run it at the edge, cannot run it in the cloud. And then these gamers, they are embedded into a virtual reality where they move freely in all directions, and they can look behind each other's back and so on. And then they play some game, and then there are spectators, and these spectators get transcoded video, not this time variant mesh, but transcoded video. And this video is distributed through a network that are propped up on demand. Frame by frame, we send one frame to each edge where a spectator is, and you have a portfolio of transcoders, so that each spectator would get a quality of service that is most suitable for her terminal. So it was one use case. And as you can imagine, people just come, they want to start games, so everything is really serverless here. And what does it mean in the 5G edge? It means you need to start all kinds of container network functions on demand, connect between them, create a service. So any of them, and each such orchestration, it's an orchestration flow triggered by some event. And you really, really cannot do this fast enough and flexible enough through the Mano solutions that telco world has today, but Argo helped us to do that. Now, we had another use case, very interesting, which subdivided into two use cases related to remote media production. One very interesting use case is about mobile journalism. So the journalist is involved in some event. We actually did it in the field, right? So the journalist is involved in some event, and now she wants to produce the content, and moreover, they compete, all these journalists compete, who would be the first for the newscast, and they do not have enough bandwidth to send high quality content to the headquarters, so they would transmit to the nearest 5G edge, and there, on demand, a cognitive infrastructure would be set up to support production, for example, to create captions on demand, face recognition, look into wiki to see who are you looking at, and so on. And then the produced content would be transferred to the newscast and ready for the program, and then the editor would look at it and put it directly into the news. And so this way they can. This is not a new application. They do it today also with 4G, but with 5G, you have much more flexibility, and you really have more capabilities to use this infrastructure at the edge rather than just sending an unedited video to the headquarters. And so it's a much slower process, and we speed it up quite considerably. And then the last one is related to the ultra high definition content distribution. And what we did, we helped our customer there, our partner there, who actually produces this. They develop these caches for the luxury sector, like yachts and hotels and so on, and the conference centers for ultra high definition content. And it's very, so you do not want to have caches all the way, all the time, in all the locations where possibly somebody can take a look at your content. So you recognize where the demand is, and then you set up, you prop up these caches on demand, and these are again container network functions, and you need to orchestrate this whole tree of caches and configure them and so on and so forth. And Argo, in all three use cases, universally, we used Argo to create all the virtual infrastructure for these applications. And moreover, in the edge, you have limited resources. They compete for resources. So you need to do some arbitration. You need to go to the optimizer and the scheduler and ask, please, who can use the GPU here? Can this application use it or that application use it? And then again, doing that all in a principled manner, we did it with Argo workflows. So I do not have time to go into all the details here, and I'm almost at the top of the hour for me. So I just want to summarize it maybe a bit. So I will skip over this diagram and so on. Yeah, I have to skip over it in the interest of time, but basically it's a little bit complicated picture, but just take a look at the right part of the picture. So on the left part of the picture, of the figure, you have the traditional Mano stack. We still use it. Basically, the telco requirement, the Mano tools would have the visibility into what's going on in this Kubernetes domain. But all the real stuff is delegated to Argo workflows and Argo events. And you see there are many, these Argo sensor and Argo gateway pairs. These pairs, essentially, we use it service descriptor is related to this use case. And if you want to tell this service, so you want something to happen inside this service, you talk to the gateway. It's like a personal orchestrator for this instance of the service, and then it talks to the sensor, and then Argo workflows is triggered, and then something happens, and it happens the way we want. And really, we were really impressed by how well Argo does. So so that's the conclusion. Basically, was very, very helpful. We found it very easy to master. What we did in this project, it was not a very large-scale system, but it was very complex system. It was very experimental system, and we found Argo very helpful to do this fast experimentation. Maybe the only thing that I can complain about Argo was that sometimes it was not fast enough, because every step you do, it's basically to pop up a container. So we have some ideas on how maybe you can pre-warm them, or maybe you can have a feature in Argo that if you need some pre-warmed containers, maybe you can trade it for the cost that you need to pay for these pre-warmed containers. But most of the time, we were within the specifications that we had to provide, rich in features. And the feature that I presented you, for example, making Argo events serverless, maybe it's an attractive feature to the community, maybe not. We have also other features in mind, but I just prefer to start from this one. Now, our experience with Argo got us thinking, actually, do we really need any orchestration engine besides Kubernetes? Maybe we should treat it as what it is, smart orchestrator, and rather than virtual manager, the way telcos treat it. And of course, there is this question of workflows versus operators. So workflow has a beginning and an end. Because we use Argo for orchestrating infrastructure, maybe a little bit in non-conventional use of Argo, because in the cloud-native world, you never deploy your application. You assume it always, so you always redo your operations. But we have some ideas of how maybe you can marry the advantages of the workflow and the advantages of the operator. And we really didn't think it through yet completely, but we have a feeling that maybe you do not need to select one or another, but maybe you can somehow benefit from it. So thank you very much. I hope I stay on budget more or less, and I'll be happy to take your questions if you have ones.
Thank you very much, David. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask David before I ask my question?
Yeah.
When are we getting 5G, David? Is that soon?
Sorry, can you say it again?
When are we getting 5G? Is that soon?
Oh, we're getting it already. Well, it's the 2020. It's a pilot year, as you know. Yeah. So, and the 5G we're getting, it's not the 5G that I'm talking about here in this presentation. The 5G that we're getting now is just slightly better than 4G in most cases. But it's a regular story. It's a very typical story in telco. So if you remember 3.5 generation, for example, when the step was made going from 3G to 4G. So now I would dub it like 4.5 rather than 5G. But I believe that 2023, from 2023 to 2025, we're really going to see the proliferation of 5G as we believe it should look like, and we're going to more and more offerings and adopters of this technology, and it will be ubiquitous. And to tell the truth, people believe that 5G.
David, I think we're losing you on the connection at the moment.
Oh, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
That's better, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I need to shout a little bit. So to finish by some optimism, I want to say that although some people believe actually it's the cause of COVID, but actually if we have this 5G infrastructure already in place now, and applications like those that I've presented to you for distant learning, teleconferencing, holographic communication, and so on, I think our experience now will be much better than what we have today.
Great stuff, David. Now, will you share the slides with us?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay, great stuff. Well, thank you very much, David. If anybody's got any other questions they want to ask or anything that jumps into your mind, just ask in the chat room and we can discuss those shortly. Next, we've got Fischer, Jemison, and Jared Welch. I hope I pronounced those names correctly from New Relic, and you're going to be talking a bit about how you guys use not just Argo workflows, but other Argo projects. Do you guys want to take over the screen share?
Yeah, let me grab that really quick. All right, Jared, are you ready to go?
Good to go.
All right, sweet. So my name is Fischer Jemison. I'm here with my colleague Jared Welch, and we're going to be talking about how we use Argo workflows at New Relic. We got a quick legal slide here. So as kind of a quick introduction, New Relic is an observability company. The kind of core technical problem we solve is ingesting really high volumes of telemetry data, which we like to say is at petabyte scale, millisecond speed, and pennies per gigabyte. We are currently hiring. If you really like this talk, we got a link in the slides here. Jared and I specifically are on the build and deploy tools team at New Relic. So most relevant to this talk, we own all of the CI/CD infrastructure at New Relic, and we own and operate basically every Argo project component that we use in one way or another. So for our agenda, we're going to start by giving kind of a really high-level overview of our cloud architecture, a similar kind of overview of our continuous delivery system. We're going to talk about a couple of our Argo workflows use cases and go in depth into one. And then we have some kind of conclusions and next steps for us related to workflows. So for our architecture overall, we're midway through an AWS migration right now. So our compute is split between cloud and private data centers. We shard our cloud infrastructure across a number of different Kubernetes clusters in AWS, where each one has kind of its own isolated cluster and associated AWS resources. Those clusters have different workload types that determine which kinds of applications get deployed into them. And different workloads have different numbers of clusters associated with them, maybe as few as 2 to 4, as many as 15 to 20 at our current scale. And these are really very big clusters with on the order of hundreds of nodes, so pretty substantial. And then at our current scale, we have almost 3,000 applications in our production Argo CD instance, which we use for all of our users' Argo CD apps. And you can see on the right here, according to our internal metrics, we ran 10,000 deploys to Kubernetes clusters in the last month, I believe, using our continuous delivery platform, which we're going to talk about in a sec. So we do all of our continuous delivery through an application called Grand Central, which is kind of an all-in-one developer platform that does a lot of different functions, but most relevant here is all CI/CD. The basic unit of Grand Central is the project, where a project is tied to a grandcentral.yaml configuration file in a GitHub repository. The most important things projects do related to deployment is defining environments, which can sometimes be grouped into environment groups. And on this slide, we have kind of an overview of what that data model looks like, where one project has many environments and an environment group may also have many environments. So getting a little more specifically into environments, there's a one-to-one mapping of environments to clusters. So if your project deploys into Kubernetes, you'll have one environment for every Kubernetes cluster you deploy into. We configure stuff like secrets and environment variables on a per environment basis, although we have tools for kind of inheriting those into individual environments if you define them at the top level. And then we do allow people to group environments into environment groups and then control how changes roll out within that group, which we'll talk about in a sec. We use Argo workflows for that. So next up is going over some of our Argo workflows use cases. The three I'm going to talk about in this section are triggering Argo CD syncs. So we use Argo workflows to decouple Argo CD syncs from GitHub master merges. We use them to orchestrate group deploys, and then we have a lot of generic automation use cases that we use Argo workflows for. We really like workflows because it's Kubernetes native. It understands Kubernetes resources really well. It runs really easily in Kubernetes. We really like working with the kind of modern declarative pipelines that are easy to define in code or define in a program and then instantiate. And then Argo workflows also integrates really easily with our existing tooling, which is all Go servers. And we have a really easy time working with the Argo API using the Argo client. So for our sync workflows, when we do a deploy to Kubernetes in Grand Central, that triggers one sync in the corresponding Argo CD application, where we have one Argo CD app per environment per application. We define a default sync and wait workflow, but we also let people define their own custom workflows. So you can either reference a workflow file in your GitHub repository, or you can reference the name of a workflow template that we have installed in Argo. And then the goal of all this, most Grand Central applications running in Kubernetes use a default Helm chart that deploys an Argo rollout. So this is just kind of a quick screenshot of what that looks like. It's a really simple workflow, just refreshes the application, syncs, and then waits for the sync to complete. The next slightly more interesting use case is group deploys. So when you have an environment group of sometimes 15 to 20 clusters, we wanted to be able to let people do kind of custom rollouts within that group. And we wanted to be able to do a configuration that was really heavily inspired by Argo rollouts, if you've looked at the Canary rollouts there. So people can define, for example, like in this screenshot, I want to deploy one environment, wait 30 minutes, deploy 20% of my environments, wait another 5 minutes, deploy 2 more environments, and then deploy the rest of my environments. And that's kind of a contrived example, but just kind of showing all the options that people can do here. And then when someone triggers a group deploy, we read in their Grand Central configuration for that environment, and we dynamically generate a deploy workflow kind of in memory in Grand Central that we then send to Argo workflows to generate the workflow and run the group deploy. And so this is kind of a series of screenshots what that looks like. We can't do a demo, unfortunately, but we do have these recorded. So this is in the Grand Central UI. You select which release you want to do. This is deploying to a group environment, so it'll tell you which environments you're deploying to. And then this is kind of what the workflow looks like when it kicks off. It'll deploy to the one environment and then pause on this wait step, which is configured as 5 minutes. And then when that completes, we have this kind of fan out to deploy 2 more environments, then wait again, then deploy the remaining 7 environments. And finally, just kind of as a general catch-all for the rest of our use cases, Grand Central is kind of our entry point for teams deploying Argo workflows. We let people define what we call generic workflows. So you're not deploying any Kubernetes workflows. You're just triggering, you're not deploying any Kubernetes resources. You're just triggering a workflow when you click to deploy. And teams use that for all sorts of stuff. So the big use case we're trying to support right now is running Terraform on command. But then we also want that to be kind of the future home of like arbitrary automation tasks that people want to do, which hopefully is going to replace all of the existing Jenkins automation that a lot of teams use. And now I'm going to pass it off to Jared.
Thank you, Fischer. So I'm going to be talking about what we've codenamed Argo Relay. Go to the next slide. So Argo Relay is our codename for a project that is a set of Argo workflows for automating our infrastructure buildouts. So each of those clusters we were talking about earlier, like we said, they're pretty large. They contain components from lots of different teams, as many as 10 to 15 teams, AWS resources associated. So there's a lot of work that goes into building those out. And it was previously, mostly manual. So Relay is our attempt to automate this in a way that makes it extremely simple to stamp out our horizontal units of scale. And it's running Terraform, Kubernetes automation, and of course Grand Central deploys. So all of the stuff we just talked about with those deploys, like we run those as part of this workflow as well. Go to the next slide. So how does it work? So it's not huge compared to, I know some people run very huge ML workflows on here. So this isn't too huge compared to that, but it's broken into steps. We use the Argo workflow DAG to express dependencies, and that's been extremely useful for making sure we have the ordering correct and making sure that services are stood up in the order that they need to. And there's of course lots of inter-service dependencies, things that depend on Kafka being up, things that depend on other consumers being up. The default behavior we started with, and this is kind of what inspired the Relay name, was sending a Slack message and having folks like click a button saying, yes, my steps are done. When the step is complete, that's all handled by Argo events, which we didn't have time to kind of cover, but there's some like custom behavior in there using Argo events. And so that kind of inspired the Relay name. It was basically like a workflow to act as an orchestration layer or a coordination layer instead of everyone just working on a Google Sheet spreadsheet. And so teams own their own steps in this top level workflow. And so we've increasingly been adding automation steps to this instead of like the manual click a button when we're done running all of our scripts manually. And most of those are Grand Central deploy. So we've created like a standardized template that actually triggers the aforementioned like Argo CD sync Grand Central deploy. The other nice thing is that teams, because it's an Argo workflow and it's just running a Docker container, people can wire in custom templates or steps as needed if they have other things they need to do that isn't just a deploy. You go to the next slide, Fischer. Here's a screenshot. This is, I think, a recent run of Relay. If you zoom in, there's like a lot of stuff going on. Some of those steps are actually fairly large. But this is kind of what it looks like. You can kind of see the first leg is like the infrastructure build out stuff that kind of happens serially, like Terraform applies and things like that. And then once we get into like the service deployments, it kind of starts fanning out as different teams steps take over. We're running this really frequently, like 2+ times a week. the workflow usually runs for a couple of days, so like up to 48 hours, it's actually executing. We've had some pain around like retries and restarts, which I think is getting better. We're trying to upgrade to Argo 2.11 soon, which I know comes with some improvements around like the retry and restart story. And pretty soon here, this will be also deployable through Grand Central. So we're kind of using workflows as, kind of our base unit of automation and using it as a building block that lets us build increasingly higher abstractions and makes it easier for people to run all of this automation and remove a lot of the manual like pain and toil. And then we just want to kind of cover some of the future stuff, like kind of how it's been going and what we're looking forward to next. So what's been great is that this has allowed us to develop new features really, really quickly. We're not reinventing the wheel constantly. So once we kind of got the basics in place, some of the base core like workflows in place, we can reuse those all over the place. And then that makes it easy to enforce, versions, enforce compliance, and also fix bugs because we fix it in one place instead of 100 places. It's been really great working with the open source community. We get questions answered really quickly. We've had some PRs approved really quickly. It's been like a really, really nice experience. The Slack is super active, much better than Spinnaker, which was our previous continuous delivery system that just did not work out. I don't know if anyone else has used Spinnaker. You probably, if you're here, you probably are no longer using it, I hope. It's been super great using Argo because every time we're like, oh man, we need to do this, there's usually a feature for it or there's a feature on the roadmap for it, which is not always the case with open source projects or any project really. There's been some, some rough edges. We've been dealing with kind of a workflows learning curve. New Relic's kind of still new to Kubernetes as a company. Of course, I don't know if anyone else gets tripped up on this, but the whole inputs versus arguments still confuses me sometimes. AKA, where the heck do I put this input field? That definitely trips up some of our users as they're starting to write their own workflows. So we've appreciated the docs improvements, and we've been, of course, writing some of our own docs that kind of wrap some of our learning and understanding and put some New Relic spin on it. And then, of course, the YAML engineering. YAML is an okay format, but it's not the best format for everything. And sometimes we feel like we're the YAML engineering team, which I'm sure other people feel that as well. Fischer, next slide. Some of the other stuff we've been dealing with, stability and scaling. Monitoring all these like workflows running and deploys has been a little challenging. Of course, Argo has standardized on Prometheus metrics, and we're a New Relic, so we have somewhat competing solutions there. We do have a product that scrapes Prometheus metrics into New Relic, but occasionally those are difficult to work with, and it's basically just we've been having trouble getting visibility into some of this stuff. So we're hoping to look at ways we can get metrics out of workflow steps or emit events from workflow steps or something like that. And then kind of unrelated to workflows, but Argo CD scaling has been a huge problem for us. We didn't cover it previously in the talk, but we actually have another instance of Argo CD that does some like background syncs for like some of our core Kubernetes infrastructure. So there's like another 3,000 apps behind the scenes that most users don't know about, but we're hoping the Argo CD 1.8 release will solve basically all of our problems here. Fingers crossed. And the other thing we've been looking at is making sure like these big relay workflows and sync workflows are idempotent and kind of self-healing so that there isn't so much manual work involved in like restarting, retrying, or recovering from errors. We're hoping to get to a point where it's just kind of, we could run it continuously if we needed to. Next slide. And then so future hold, we're hoping to just automate all of the things basically with workflows. It's kind of our unit of automation. We recently got a New Relic metric provider merged into Argo rollouts. So we're hoping to use that in the future to do all sorts of analysis at deploy time, both for a specific environment, but also as part of like group deploys. So kind of mimicking the Argo rollouts analysis steps, but doing it on like a broader scale where each step is, deployed to a whole environment. Replacing a legacy deploy scheduler that kind of does our auto promotions. We're hoping to replace that with workflows. We don't think it'll be difficult really. And then finally, like getting to a point where when people come to us asking how do I deploy X, the answer is go write a workflow. You know, nobody's building any custom tooling, nobody's standing up new services or anything like that. It's just build a workflow and away you go. That's all we got. Jared at jwelch92 on GitHub. That's not a ton in there, but there's a couple cool things, Argo in there. And then Fischer, of course, Jemison on GitHub.
Yeah, happy to take questions if anyone has any.
That's great stuff. Do you guys use all the 4 Argo products?
Yeah, we use Argo events a little bit so far. I'm actually looking at using it. Well, this week I'm working on using it to send notifications from that big relay workflow when like a pod fails or something like that, so that people aren't sitting around waiting to see what happens. So that's actually looking at doing that. And then we use Argo rollouts. We have it installed on all of our clusters. So I think 3/4 or more of those 3,000 some applications we're running are using Argo rollouts. Some of them with lots of instances. So it's been interesting.
What do you do about provisioning storage for your workflows?
Right now, I think we just are using S3 as the artifact storage. We don't do, I think it's basically just storing the logs, and then we have a handful of workflows that pass data between steps, but it's not too many. A lot of the steps are kind of isolated. So it hasn't been too much of a bottleneck for us yet. We'll see how that goes. We haven't had to deal with any like volumes, shared volumes or anything like that so far.
The vast majority of the workflows we run are those sync workflows, so either the ones we write or custom ones, so they're very lightweight and don't use storage super heavily.
Do you what other tools are in your ecosystem?
Like
Jenkins?
Like what? Oh yeah, the CI system is Jenkins, which Grand Central like orchestrates. It's like users don't have to like create jobs manually in Jenkins. For all the Grand Central managed CI, Grand Central will like template out jobs for them. And then there's a lot of like other Jenkinses running that teams run for various automation or builds that are kind of non-standard. And we're seeing a lot of folks kind of reach for workflows first instead of Jenkins for things that they need to automate or run on a schedule, especially. That's been one of the cool things about moving to Kubernetes is we used to run in Marathon, and there's no way to just run a job on a cron. So people would stand up a whole Jenkins to run a script every week or something like that. Whereas in Kubernetes, you can use a batch job or a cron workflow if you want more flexibility, and just like that, you can run something on a schedule, and it's easy, and you can deploy it through Grand Central with Argo CD.
Oh, neat. And do you? I'm asking all the questions. So anybody else has other questions, please jump in. Do you GitOps your workflows?
Yes and no. Like Fischer was mentioning, we have those group deploy workflows. Those are actually generated dynamically at deploy time using the Argo workflows like Go types. But the vast majority of the other workflows are GitOps installed with Argo CD. We use templates very, very heavily. I think for every one workflow file, we probably have like 10 workflow template files sitting around. So we use those primarily, actually.
Okay, great.
How granular do your template files get? As in, does it tend to be just like, a single, like, is it just a couple of steps or just one step? Or is it like usually like big DAGs that tend to then be resolved and like outputs are passed to the later steps and stuff like that?
We have a mix. A good chunk of our templates are kind of like collections of standardized steps. So some of them are, a bunch of, we have like a whole bunch of Argo CD steps of various shapes and sizes. They're all hung on the same workflow template file, but are consumed at different layers, depending on what else is calling it. We are that big Argo relay workflow we were talking about. We are looking at potentially splitting that up into very, smaller, making it, right now it's a workflow file, so making it into workflow templates, which would of course those would be sub DAGs that would all get attached to like one top level DAG that we would execute. So it's a mix. Most of our workflows are not super huge, but they've been, we're starting to have a lot of them overall.
Quick other question. Well, I've got you. Have you guys like, so in those templates they tend to use, do you use any kind of like templates that run in parallel and then have to be aggregated? Because I know that like there's been some stuff through like aggregating artifacts versus parameters and stuff like that. Is that something you've run into, or is it just not a use case that you have?
I would say not really a use case that we have. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more like we use the DAG for the ordering, but I don't think there's actually any outputs other than like that the steps are successful.
Right.
So we kind of use the DAG as a way of like checkpointing and making sure that like, these 5 steps are complete before we go on to the next thing that depends on them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cheers.
Thanks.
I also got a question. This is really impressive. So I was just wondering, I mean, you mentioned that this is a lot of YAML engineering, and then you're sometimes having trouble, what is an argument, where does the input have to go, etc. So I was wondering, since you're telling other teams also to write workflows, how are you actually testing the workflows and also developing them? So basically making sure that your infrastructure doesn't work. Do you always have, do you have a testing environment where people can just play around for that, or how do you do that?
Yeah, we have a mix of things. We've got we have a staging environment that's like locked down to basically just our team where we can run stuff. We also provide a repository with a kind cluster with a bunch of YAML and a script for basically standing up our entire Argo infrastructure in kind. So you just like run like a run local script, and it will pull all the secrets from Vault, stand up the kind cluster, stand up Argo CD, and then use the app of apps pattern and self-managed Argo CD to kind of install the rest of the components, including all of our like standard workflow templates. So we've seen a lot of people use that. And then there's a handful of teams that are installing their own, installing Argo workflows on their own cluster. So they have kind of an isolated test environment to develop their stuff as well.
Okay, cool, thank you.
I like what she said, automate all the things with Argo products. This is something what I'm trying to sell to our company too. It's just I'm feeling that there is some sort of a hesitance from developers or from people who should be using the workflows. Like the learning curve is here and there's something new, people are afraid. How does it feel in your company when you ask developers or your engineering teams to write workflows?
I think a lot of people are excited to get out of Jenkins at New Relic. So workflows is nice from that perspective. We definitely also, we provide a lot of support for teams as they're moving into, excuse me, as they're moving into Kubernetes kind of on our platform. So we try to be really readily available to answer questions as they come up. And I don't know, Jared, do you have anything to add to that?
No, yeah, it's a lot of support and like consulting, providing a lot of workflow templates. So like a lot of the times when folks are writing their own workflows, like at least some of the steps in there are templates that we've provided because we've written a fair number of kind of generic steps that work for a lot of things. Yeah, it hasn't always been easy. Some folks struggle with learning workflows, so we've tried to write docs, make sure we have docs available, and provide tight feedback loops by making sure we have ways for people to like link their workflows or test them out. Things like that has helped.
Perfect, thank you. This is being recorded, so I'm gonna have my folks listen to this recording.
Cool. Nice.
Great stuff, guys. And will you share your slides with us?
Yes, we will figure out how to do that and make sure we can. Yeah.
Cool. Like a Google slide is brilliant, brilliant. And I'll probably come back and ask you guys maybe about coming to guest blog post at some point in the future as well. A couple of other people have promised to do that for me, so that'll be coming up over the next couple of months, where we talk a little bit in our blog about the use cases and maybe a bit of a different kind of dive into this, what people are doing. Okay, fantastic. Okay, thank you very much, guys. So next, we're just kind of a short how-to from a guy called Paul Brabban. I don't know who Paul works for, so maybe you could tell us little bit about your organization. We know a lot of people use, we know editing YAML can be a bit of a pain for people. And so we want to provide kind of better IDE support. Paul's going to talk a little bit about editing workflows in VS Code. Paul, are you ready?
Yes. Can you hear me, Alex?
Brilliant. I can hear you. Yes, brilliant. Take it away.
It's a good start. Hi. Yeah, I'm Paul. I'm an independent consultant, and I'm currently working with a UK retailer who we need to do some data science work, and rather than go for Airflow like everybody else, I thought we'd try something. Different and hopefully a bit more lightweight and Kubernetes native. But yeah, one of the challenges that I've certainly got is there's a lot of YAML, and folks don't like editing it very much. So yeah, I put a bit of time in to try and get the IDE support that we have for IntelliJ in VS Code. So I'm just going to quickly share into the chat the link to a JSON schema that Alex has put together, which we'll be using in the demo if you do want to follow along or go afterwards. But let me just try and share my screen now. I'm going to try and share my VS Code. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Okay, so what I've done is kind of uninstalled everything. We'll start from scratch. First thing we've got to do is get the VS Code YAML plugin, the Red Hat YAML plugin. Now, if you've got Kubernetes, the Kubernetes plugin installed, then you'll already have it. But if not, then it's available as a plugin in its own right. So just install that quickly. See, proper demo, things could go wrong. Okay, so that's installed now, nice and simple. It's from a reasonably reputable publisher, so should hopefully be okay for you. So I've also got the project I have open is the Argo project itself with all the examples. So I'm just going to use the Hello World example from that to show you the kind of support that you get. So for example, if I want to add a new element here to this workflow step, you control space to see what my autocomplete options are. As you can see, this is just what it's guessing from the other words that are in the document. It doesn't really make any sense at this point in the template. Hopefully that will change when we get the schema set up. So we just have to configure the YAML plugin with the schema. So back to the extensions window here, extension settings just to speed up getting there, and we've got YAML schemas here as well on the settings. So we'll click that. It's JSON document, and we're going to add the schema. Now, oops, what did I just do? There we go. So the first thing we've got to do is get that the URL that I shared in the chat. Let me just grab that. I think I have that now. There we go. So I presume this is probably going to have a location that looks more stable and it'll be updated. Updates will appear automatically. But that's this is kind of where we are at the moment. So basically, the structure of this elements, you've got YAML.schemas. The key is the link to the schema itself, and the second part is just a file glob for the files that we're going to apply the schema to. So the glob I've got here is just going to apply it to everything under examples. Examples slash any subfolder and then anything.yaml. I have had some problems with, I had the Kubernetes schemas in here as well, which overlapped with the, sorry, just got my cat scratching at the door, which overlapped. They were both trying to do YAML documents, and I was getting strange errors. So one thing to be aware of, if you try this, if you do have overlaps in the globs, then you might see funny errors. I ended up naming my workflow.yaml to get around that in my real projects. Okay, so that's set up. Just save that. Hopefully we go back to Hello World YAML. There are no errors in here, but for example, if I try and create a parameter without a name, I've now got an error. So the error is that I've got a missing property name in this element here. And there's descriptive text from the schema up at the top there as well. So this is the kind of support that you get, which obviously before, I don't know what the name was. There we go, it's message. Also, you get certainly type support. So if I try and give it a name of 1, I get an error because I'm not allowed to use a number where a string is expected. So it's really basic support at the moment, but it is helpful. So back to here. So what can I actually apply at this point in the template? That makes more sense. So I can apply continue on exit template, etc. These are actually all valid at this point in the schema. And again, obviously, it'll give me a little bit of help to figure out what kind of types I can actually use at each point So it's fairly basic support, but I presume we can start raising PRs and issues and extending what is covered by the template if we want to do that. And that's essentially it. So all the workflow types should be supported. So there's a cron workflow down here somewhere. There we go, cron workflow. So for example, when I'm talking about the schemas being fairly weak, this workflow will allow you to remove the schedule element from a cron workflow, which obviously isn't legal. I think that's not legal or shouldn't be legal. So there's some things that are allowed that shouldn't be allowed, but certainly the support you do get is very helpful. And again, you can see you've got options here that are valid rather than some invalid options there as well, but a lot of the options there are valid at this point in the spec. And that's basically that's all I had to talk about. Any questions or any thoughts?
So Jared says that he's found the IntelliJ plugin helpful, and I'm guessing talking about the Kubernetes one. But I think when I spoke to you about earlier this week, you mentioned this is possible to do in the free version of IntelliJ as well.
That's right, yeah. So the IntelliJ instructions, the Kubernetes plugin doesn't work on IntelliJ Community Edition, IDEA Community Edition. It has to be the Ultimate Edition, which is why I started looking at this, because I would just have used IntelliJ. But yeah, because this is so the trick is that the schema documents that are used by that plugin are kind of Kubernetes Open API documents, I think. Whereas this is just a plain JSON schema, which is a standard way of validating YAML documents, which are just JSON really. So you can certainly use the native IDEA functionality to validate YAML documents. It's just in your like settings. You can see like JSON schema settings there. Same thing. You define where the schema is located, and you provide a way of linking it to documents in your project. There's also a plugin for what's it called? Sublime Text. I suspect most kind of reasonably comprehensive editors will have some support for validating a YAML document with a JSON schema. So hopefully this really kind of levels the playing field in terms of support across different IDEs.
I can tell you for sure that the JSON schema is actually more accurate than the CRD validation, because the Kubernetes Open API specification is actually a subset of JSON schema, and it doesn't allow cross-referencing to other types. So it's actually it's not possible to get it to work for workflow steps. It's a deficiency in the Kubernetes Open API specification. That means that you can't actually fully describe workflows, because our schema is relatively complicated for a custom resource.
Sure
we should do some docs for this.
Definitely, I'm happy to help with that. I mean, I was also thinking about the linter as well. I don't know whether it might be worth trying to unify the things that are checking sort of the quality behind this one sort of schema that we can then contribute to and cover all the kind of funny cases that we find.
Yeah. I want to hear more about that, because I didn't know that we had a problem with our schema. You mentioned that the template is actually optional in a DAG task, and it's actually incorrect. That's not the first time we found an error like that, though. So
yeah, so here if I can supply a template and a template ref, which I think is illegal. So
we need
go ahead, sorry.
We need to figure out that rule.
Yeah, but we can work from here, right? That's a good start.
Okay, anybody want to ask any more about this? Cool, thank you very much, Paul. So we're a bit over time, but everybody seems to be hanging on in there. And so I'll try and go through this last bit relatively quickly, maybe spend about 10 minutes on it, and I'll explain why I don't want to spend too much time on it as we go forward. There is actually a rationale for me trying to not just standard work avoidance, but things. So we're going to be producing a new version of Argo workflows. It'll be called version V3. Now, normally V3 is a breaking change for most applications. You don't really expect an upgrade to go particularly well between the V2 and the V3 version. And that's actually not our intention at all. I want to make that very clear up front. The reason we're going to migrate to V3 is about because of how Golang makes Go modules work, nobody can use the Go modules unless you do it in a specific, very prescriptive way. And that actually requires us, I don't want to go into the details, actually requires us to actually change the version from V2 to V3. Now, when we're going to do that, we're actually going to plan to build out some new user interface features, and we're actually going to separate the user interface that currently lives in the same code base with the same manifests into a new repository, allowing you to deploy that user interface separately or choosing not to deploy it. And there's a number of reasons behind that about kind of improving our own developer velocity, allowing us to actually iterate on the user interface much more quickly. Okay, so what else do we want to get out of that user interface? Well, we want to provide some support for Argo events in that. And I've got 2 links for people here in this document. I'm just going to drop them into the chat for you. A little chat. Actually, let me just drop this URL to this document, which should be public. If it's not, let me know. So there's that. No, I just didn't work. Let's try again. There we go. That's the document there. And there are 2 links here I've highlighted in yellow. One is to an online application that you can log into and test out. And I'll just show you that very quickly. And then another one is a link to this UI working doc, which is this next tab. This UI doc is just intended to be a list that people can add and provide feedback on what they think the Argo events user interface and the V3 user interface should do. So we know what people want. And if you like something, come and add a comment here or add a line, and we'll add it to this list as something that maybe we should do. Okay. On to the actual interface itself. So if you want to access this interface, go to workflows.apps.argoproj.io and log in using your GitHub login, and that'll give you read-only access to this user interface. And you can see, you can have a go at yourself. And you'll notice there are a couple of new icons on the left-hand tab. This one is an events icon. This is actually the existing workflow icon. We're using a slightly different iconography. Then there's a workflow events binding icon, and finally, workflow templates one is of interest. Okay. And I'll actually show you a little bit about reports as well shortly. Just give you a quick overview of that 2.12 feature. So do I need to reload the page? I think I need to. Oh, what's going on here? This will be a very, very short demo if it doesn't load. There we go. Oh, this is going to be this is the world's shortest demo because I don't have any backup or whatsoever. Okay, I don't really know why. I don't really know why that's not working. Let's just try it in a different browser. Okay, so I'm going to guess that there's been some kind of downtime. I apologize for that. I was going to show you guys a demo, but what I can do instead is just show you a couple of slides that we produced recently. These slides are already kind of out of date. Here we go. So this is just talking, these slides will just, I'll talk through a couple of the areas I want to go through quite quickly. So one thing is we have a new view, doesn't quite look like this anymore, slightly different, that shows you the relationship between Argo events entities. So you can open that and see that what sensors and what triggers that you have in your user interface. It'll also show animations when events go between one item and another. These are some of the examples of the icons you'll see in the user interface. And what I really wanted to show you was the new workflow editor. So we're going to have a workflow that allows editor that allows you to edit your workflow and workflow templates in a visual format. Currently, it's only kind of implemented for workflow templates. It allows you to do things like add DAGs and tasks to it. Okay, so I mentioned I don't want to go into a great deal of detail. We'll just see if it's back up. No, it's not back up. Not really sure what's happened. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, providing feedback or testing it out, have a look at this document. Hopefully I'll get them working again later on, and we will have opportunity for you to provide feedback and help guide that vision for it as well.
It's the ingress controller. The ingress controller is down. I'm trying to scale it up right now.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. Jesse's going to try and sort it out, but I probably won't be available before the end of this meeting. And I'll drop that in. I will let you know in the Argo Workflows channel, the Argo Events channel. Okay, there was a question in the chat. Any plan when Argo Workflows 2.12 will be released? So Argo Workflows 2.12 is currently RC2 or RC3. Simon's overseeing that release at the moment. We tend to gather a bit of feedback. It takes a couple of weeks, so I'd imagine maybe a week to 2 weeks from now you'll see version 0 of that available. If you're desperate to try it out, obviously you can try out latest. If you're using the user interface, it's usually relatively safe to try run more recent versions of the user interface with older versions.
Okay,
Less safe
exactly.
with the control and executor. Is it working, Jesse?
Yeah.
It is brilliant. Oh, okay. So as I mentioned, you can have a look at the events. I said it changed in terms of the coloring in the interface. So this particular one will show you a events. I think it goes every 10 seconds. It's proof of concept. There we go. So there you go. We can see that's triggering a workflow sensor. There's a new workflows in here. You can have a look at these workflows. You can see that's the workflow there as well. This has got set up with a workflow event binding that listens to messages from GitHub, so you can be able to see workflows triggered from GitHub. And what we can do is maybe we can have a look at the new workflow template editor very quickly. This is the new workflow template editor. You've got controls to do things like add a new container to it as well. You can wire those containers and play around with it. This is quite new, and I'm aware it needs a bit more work. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. The very last thing I've added to the community meeting document is a few promotions for people presenting about Argo at KubeCon North America today, tomorrow, and on Friday. So if you've signed up for that and you've access to their virtual platform, you can check out those as well. If you are interested in presenting at the community meeting or coming on and doing a guest blog post about the things you're working on, do kind of DM me on Slack or send me an email, and we can have a little chat about that. And we love hearing from presentations from people. We may have a little break over December. I'm discussing it with the team if we might do a slightly different format meeting in December, and we'll let you know about that closer to the time. Okay. Thank you very much for joining today, and I'll be uploading this video to YouTube shortly so you can enjoy it. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. See ya.
Bye.
Thanks.